Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you. Wow, it's different being up here. I haven't done anything like this in like 2 years. It feels like a lot longer. So we'll get through this together though. And it's amazing to be here. I love this festival. I've been coming here for years, and it's become a big part of my life, as I'm sure it has for many of you. And it was back in 2008 when I first attended the festival. I had just moved to Vancouver. I had just bought my first mountain bike since I was a teenager. And I was going out and I was exploring the North Shore Mountains. And I have to admit, it wasn't going very well. I found the trails to just be terrifying and intimidating. And I had a really hard time imagining just how people were riding some of the stuff that I was seeing. So I guess I was looking for some inspiration. And I came to the festival and I saw a film that would have a huge impact on my life. It was Seasons by The Collective. And it was a brilliant film, and I watched it again a little while ago, and what struck me then as it does now is just how perfectly they captured just how much fun it is to ride a bike, how much fun it is to get out on the land with your friends and play. And that's something that really stuck with me. I mean, that's what we're all looking for, right? Is those epic rides. You know, they take you out, a trail that takes you up in the mountains and cuts down through the forest like a ribbon of silk, where the ride becomes more like a dance, you know, a union between rider, earth, and gravity. And you come out the end, and you've pushed yourself beyond your limits, and you're transformed. It becomes something sacred. And I think we're always looking for that. And, you know, that sense of play has always been a really important part of what it means to be human. You know, you go back, a million years ago, when our ancestors were just little unassuming primates living up in the trees, and our climate started to go through a change. It was shifting to hotter, drier conditions. The forests were giving away to savanna, and our ancestors had to come down out of the trees and out onto open land. And it was through that capacity for play that they explored new ways of moving across the land. They broke through those barriers. They stood up to better see prey, to evade predators. It was a major leap forward in our evolution and our journey towards becoming human. And it was essentially our climate started to change, and through that sense of play, we changed with it. And I think the bicycle may be one of the most elegant manifestations of that capacity for play. It was inspired by one man's love of play, of balance and momentum, a man named Baron Karl von Drais. He was a German self-styled mathematician and inventor in the early 1800s, and he created this, the Lauf machine, or the running machine. It was inspired by his love of ice skating and the popularity of the hobby horse at the time. It was 2 small carriage wheels in alignment with a wooden frame. Basically, it was the forerunner of the Strider bikes that we give kids today to teach them how to ride. And he envisioned the bicycle as a possible replacement for horses. Now, that didn't happen. The Lauf machine, the running machine, it did spread throughout Europe. It became mostly a plaything for the upper classes. And humanity moved in a different direction. This was the time of steam and steam power fueled by coal and the dawn of the Carbon Age and the Anthropocene, whereby we started to emit carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. But his invention continued to evolve. It went through a number of different iterations, like the penny farthing, and then eventually the safety bicycle, which is basically what we know as the modern bicycle today. And nowhere has that rapid evolution of the technology been more evident than in the world of mountain biking. Mountain biking may have started in Marin County in California and the dusty hills above San Francisco. But I think we can all agree here that BC is the spiritual home of mountain biking. Right? I mean, it's here that, a small group of renegade riders, those early velo pioneers, took the bike off the forestry roads and into the forest, where it became a child of loam and dirt and mud. And they broke through those barriers, and they paid for that with their bodies, broken bones, and broken bikes. And the bike companies started getting all these broken bikes back from BC, and they must have been asking themselves, like, what the heck is going on up there? But they responded. They started changing their bikes. They started changing the geometry of the frames. They started making beefier suspension systems, more aggressive tire treads. We started seeing body armor. The riders changed, and they changed the technology with them. They were like in this almost like a predator-prey relationship, one pushing the other to advance and evolve. So inspired by seasons, I continued to ride the North Shore. And at that time, I had accepted a new job as a community planner working with First Nations all over BC. And similar to my experiences of riding the North Shore, it wasn't actually going that well. I was basically like a government-hired consultant, and I would be flown into these little remote communities around the province, and I was the awkward white guy who shows up. It's like, let's have a vision session. And I would listen as the elders and the leadership would talk about the challenges confronting their community, the lack of housing, lack of employment opportunities, and their concern for their youth, living sedentary lives, getting mixed up in drugs and alcohol, growing epidemic of suicide. And I had this growing knot in my stomach that despite my years of education, my supposed expertise, my overinflated billing rates, I had nothing of value to offer them. And a growing realization that I was part of the problem. I was part of a system that was causing these problems to begin with no real solution in mind. And it all changed for me when I was in a small community called the Boothroyd Indian Band. That's what they call themselves, Boothroyd Indian Band. They're an interior Salish people, the Cutmuk First Nation, who've lived in the Fraser Canyon for thousands of years. And I was in a meeting with the chief and the council, and right in the middle of the meeting, I heard this soft sandpaper scratch, a whisper in my ear that said, "What do you know about mountain biking?" And it was an elder from the community, and he asked me, because I always showed up to these meetings with my mountain bike on the back of my car. It's what I would do after the meetings to try and keep my sanity. And he said to me, "Our kids are doing it. They're riding all over the community. We can't leave a pile of dirt without these kids building some stupid-looking jump out of it." At one point, they were digging soil away from all the fire hydrants around the community because it was the one good place they could get, a good mix of clay and sand that they could build jumps out of. And all the fire hydrants around the community were laying over askew. So we don't want them to stop. It'd be nice if they stopped taking boards from my fence and firewood to build their features, but we want them to stay outside. We want them to stay active. We want to build them a bike park. Can you help us? And of course, I said yes. Now, I didn't know anything about building bike parks. I didn't know anything about trails, but there was no way I was going to refuse. And so I reached out to as many people I could in the mountain bike community, some great trail builders and who came and helped out. We returned to the community. And you're doing something right when you show up to a small First Nation community on a cold, wet Saturday morning in June, and there's 15 kids, boys and girls, all waiting for you. And before I can even park my car and get out, they're swarming my vehicle. They're yelling at me, "We've been waiting. Where have you been? Let's go." And I'm like, "I'm 30 minutes early. What are you doing here?" And those kids worked for 10 hours a day. Let's be realistic. 10 hours a day for the next 2 days to build their own little bike park. And we just played together. We built a little learning square with like little ramps and jumps. We built them a little pump track and some tabletop jumps so they could practice their courage and their skill. And the whole community came out, elders, parents, everyone came out, and we just played together for 2 days. And the community was just filled with laughter. I had never seen anything like it before. And near the end of the weekend, the elder who had invited me came to me and said, "This reminds me when I was a kid, and my father and my grandfather would tell me stories about how our people used to play out on the land. We've always been adventurous, playful people." He told me of how they used to ride their horses down the steep, sandy banks above the Fraser River. It was extremely dangerous. People would die. But he said, that's who we were. That's always who we've been. That's how we imagine new ways of living out on the land. And that's how we thrived in such a harsh and unforgiving climate. So inspired by that, I spent the next 2 years traveling all over the province, visiting as many communities as I could, and I formed the Indigenous Youth Mountain Bike Program. And the whole idea was just to get kids out on bikes and have some fun and play outdoors. And I would visit community after community. And I had this kind of grand vision in my head, like I was going to create this Shangri-La of mountain biking, and everybody was going to come together, and it was just going to be a beautiful utopian ideal. And most of the communities I visited would listen politely, and they'd be like, yeah, no thanks. And I couldn't understand it. I didn't understand why couldn't they see what I was seeing. It had so much potential. And I think I look back on it now, and I realize I may have been suffering from a moderate to severe case of white savior syndrome. The Boothroyd folks, they loved to tease me about it. They'd call me like Gear Owl, or a man named Bike, Dances with Wheels. Some of the kids started calling me Sprockahontas. I'm not really sure where they got that. But it all changed for me when I met this man, Tom Eustache. Tom is a member of the Simp people, which is a Secwepemc community up in the interior BC, and they've lived in the North Thompson River Valley for thousands of years. And at this point, I was kind of ready to give up on the whole idea. It wasn't going very well. And I was told about Tom, a friend of mine, and he talked about them as if they were like this lost mountain bike tribe. He's like, they're up in the mountains, they're creating trails, they're riding bikes, you have to go. So I went to visit the community, and I met Tom, and I have to admit at the time, he didn't really seem like much of a mountain biker to me. He wasn't wearing flannel. He was kind of quiet, and I met him in his community, and I went to give him the usual spiel, my sales pitch, and before I could say anything, he said, let's go for a ride. So we got on our bikes, and he might have been a quiet guy, but the second he got on his bike, it was like he was transformed. Like he just lit up, he had a huge smile on his face, and he took off like a bullet from a rabbit gun. And it took everything I could to keep up with him. And he took me on a ride up on this hill above their community where they had been building trails. The trails weren't amazing, they were kind of scratched out game trails, but Tom attacked them like it was a run at the Red Bull Rampage. He just flew down the mountain, and it was like watching a performer dance. He just hit every little rock and every little root, and he was laughing and hollering the entire way down, and it took everything that I could to just keep up with him. Just remember, I'm not a very good mountain biker. I almost died. And he came down at the bottom and did the big curving skid with a big cloud of dust around him, and he looked at me and he was like, that was epic. And I knew I wanted to work with him. And before I could say anything more, he literally shoved a rogue hoe in my hand and said, if you want to play with us, first you have to dig. And that's what I did. For the next couple of years, I kept returning and working with Tom, and we started building a trail above the community that he had long envisioned. And it included a learning circle, because he said, we need to have a place where we take our kids out in the woods and we teach them. Truth before rides is what he would always say. And then at the bottom of the trail, he had my good friend Thomas Schoen from Williams Lake build this absolutely sick wooden feature. You can't tell from here, but this thing is easily 12 feet off the ground, has a long platform out to where it drops off, and it completely terrified me. I would ride up to the edge of this thing over and over and over again. I just couldn't work up the courage to do it. I couldn't imagine how anybody could ride this. And as we were working together, down in the dirt on our hands and knees, day after day, this is where Tom really started to open up to me. He started telling me about his people and how they view and understand what it means when a white guy shows up in their community talking about something that's supposed to benefit them. And he told me about how his people, the Simp people, their territories ranged all the way up to the headwaters of the Fraser and Jasper National Park. And they had a village near the current day community of Valemount. And in 1916, an RCMP detachment showed up and forced his people to pick up whatever little they could carry, and they forced them to march 350 kilometers south to Chuchua, just north of Kamloops, where they live today. And he told me how it feels for him when he returns to the Valemount area and he sees that it's become a very popular snowmobile and mountain bike destination. How we approach the land and how we play on it is not neutral. And he talked to me about the Oka crisis. In 1990, this was a major event in Canadian history. The Mohawk, a small municipality outside of Quebec, wanted to expand a development into a place called the Pines, which had been expropriated from the Mohawk, and they had been fighting to get it back for years. It was a burial ground. And so they opposed the development. They set up a blockade that led to a 78-day standoff between the military and the warriors. It was all over the media. It was a huge event. That development that they were looking to expand was a golf course. How we play on the land is not neutral. And he told me about sun peaks right in our backyard. This is in Secwepemc territory. This is in the Nisconlith people, which are related to my friend Tom. And back in the early 2000s, a company wanted to take what had been a small community ski hill and vastly expand it into a major resort. The Nisconlith people absolutely opposed it. It was an area that was sacred to them. It was a place for bears. It's where they collected their medicines. They opposed it. They set up a blockade. The RCMP were brought in, and they were assaulted and arrested, and a number of them spent time in jail. And now, Sun Peaks is a highly popular destination and just recently hosted Crankworks this past year. So we continued building together, and we brought in some great trail builders to help us. Mark Wood, who was with the North Shore Mountain Bike Association at the time, my good friend Thomas Schoen, a master trail builder from Williams Lake, and we built some absolutely beautiful trails. And Tom is always telling me, our people, we're like the trail weavers. We've been building trails in this land for thousands of years. And we've always invented and adopted and taken on new ways of traveling across the land, whether it's snowshoes or canoes or horses and now mountain bikes. We are making it our own. And now they get thousands of visitors from all over the world to come ride their trails. And one of the things I love is returning and seeing how the community is using the trails in ways we never anticipated. There's a women's running club. They call themselves the Running Aunties. The school uses the trails to teach their kids about their language, how to harvest medicines. They're taking the trails and creating them for themselves. And when the trails were finally completed, we held a community celebration. And we came together and we brought all the kids to the learning circle. And Tom and an elder told them about their history. They told them about their forest removal. They told them about the residential schools where just recently, as we all know, 215 graves were uncovered. Some of those people are very likely Tom's family, extended cousins and uncles that never returned home. And one thing Tom would say to the youth to his kids and his youth is, you being here is a victory for our people. When you're out on the trails, you're honoring your ancestors. And just remember, your ancestors are cheering you on. Use that to propel you forward, to face your fears. And most importantly, have fun. And we went for a ride. And these kids are growing up on these trails, just like the kids here in the North Shore. They're growing up on the trails that were built by their cousins and their aunties and their uncles. And they're really fast. Like way faster than me. They put me to shame. I'm always chasing them down the hill. And as we're riding down the trails together and we could feel the story that we created together sort of vibrating up and through our wheels and into our frame and into our bodies and into our hearts, I knew we were headed for that wooden feature. And I knew the kids were going to do it. And if they could be that brave, if they could take everything that they're told and hold that in their heart and still get out and ride, there was no way I wasn't going to do it. And I saw the feature coming up, and the kids were following Tom off that feature like little ducklings out of the nest, just flying off of it. And I knew I had to do it. And I rode up to the edge of it and dropped off the end. And it was in that moment that I finally understood what it was that the elder from Boothroyd and Tom were trying to tell me about play and what it means. Play and riding isn't just about, hitting and shredding a trail or all the jank gnar or the sick berms. I mean, all those things are amazing. But the real strength with the mountain biking is that when we were first out in the forest and the backlash came and we almost got pushed out of the woods, is that people came together and we formed a community. We formed relationships. And we started building better and different trails. We showed that we could be responsible stewards out on the land. We changed our community with us. And that's the real strength of mountain biking. And we see all the changes that are happening around us. The wildfires and the atmospheric heat domes and atmospheric rivers. And I always remember that the bike was created in a time of crisis, at a time of climate crisis. When Baron Karl von Drais created the Lauf machine in the early 1800s, the world was going through a climate crisis. A year before, in Indonesia, a massive volcanic eruption had occurred. It was the largest in human history at the time, and it dumped enough ash and dust into the air that it reduced global temperatures by 3 degrees. 1816 in Europe was known as the year without winter. There's widespread famine and crop failures. 10,000 horses died, and by 1817, industry had ground to a halt. This was the environment in which Karl von Drais created his Lauf machine. The bicycle has always been a symbol and a manifestation of hope. And in that moment, watching that ground rushing up at me, I realized that what it really is about pushing our boundaries, facing our fears, and we can come out the bottom of this transformed. And this is the promise and hope of reconciliation. We can change, and we can change our environment with us. We can create relationships, and we can come out the bottom of this trail that we're on together as relations. So I stuck the landing. I did. And I shrunk my suspension down until it hit rock bottom. And I think I was just so surprised. You ever have one of those moments where you're so shocked that you did something that you just kind of go, oh! And I was so elated that I actually stuck it that I missed the sharp turn that happens right afterwards. My front tire clipped the top of the berm, and I went flying out over my handlebars and rolled through the bushes and came to a stop just staring up at the sky. And all of a sudden, these little soft brown faces with dark eyes and big smiles appeared over looking down at me. One kid kind of kicked me with his shoe, make sure I was alive. And then Tom appeared, and he looked down at me, and he said, "That was epic." Thank you very much.